Hi, my name is Corbin Tubbs, and the biofuel I'm going to be talking about today is ethanol. So, ethanol is produced from starch and sugar-based crops, and over 90% of it is made in the dry milling process, and the rest comes from wet mills. But since so little ethanol is produced from the wet milling process, I'm just going to be talking about the dry milling process for the sake of this video. So, the first step of the dry milling process is called milling, and during this step, whole corn kernels are ground into a fine flour called meal. And after milling, this is when the step called liquefaction happens. And here, the cornmeal is mixed with water to form a slurry, and alpha amylase enzymes are added. The solution is then heated to break long starch chains into shorter chains called dextrins. So next, a process called saccharification occurs, and this is where the slurry is cooled and another enzyme called glucoamylase is added. And now the glucoamylase converts the dextrins into glucose, which can be fermented by the yeast. So here, fermentation happens, and this is where the glucose-rich mash is pumped into large fermenters, and the yeast is added into them. And the yeast consumes the sugars and produces ethanol and CO2. And this whole fermentation process usually takes about 48 to 72 hours, and when it's finished, it leaves a mixture called beer, which contains about 12 to 15% ethanol. And this beer is then sent to a distillation system, and since ethanol evaporates at a lower temperature than water, the beer mixture is heated up to separate the ethanol from the water, which produces hydrous ethanol, which is approximately 95% ethanol. But fuel ethanol needs to be almost pure, so the final traces of water need to be removed, and this is done using molecular sieves which trap water molecules and leaves about 99+ ethanol, which is now ready to be mixed with gasoline. And throughout this whole process, any leftover grain from this process is also dried and sold as animal feed, and the CO2 from fermentation can be captured and used for things like beverages, refrigeration, or other industrial applications. So, moving on from production, ethanol is a very widely accessible fuel, with over 98% of gasoline in the United States containing some ethanol. And as far as the carbon footprint is concerned, a study conducted by researchers at the U.S. Department of Energy's Argonne National Laboratory showed that the use of ethanol is actually reducing both the carbon footprint and greenhouse gases. The study spanned from 2005 to 2019, a period where ethanol production more than quadrupled. And what they found was that over this time period, ethanol's greenhouse gas emission intensity, also known as carbon intensity, was ultimately reduced by 23%. And also, in 2022, the ethanol industry contributed just over $57 billion to the nation's GDP, which was the second highest GDP contribution ever. And overall, the ethanol industry's position in the nation's economy continues to grow in terms of things like job creation and generation of tax revenue. Organizations such as the National Corn Growers Association have put on digital campaigns to highlight the benefits of ethanol, such as reduced emissions, and also marketing campaigns to point out to the public and policymakers the benefits such as cost savings and other environmental benefits. Since ethanol has benefited both the environment and the economy, and funding doesn't really appear to be an issue, I would say that the best thing we can do here next, going forward, is just make more of it, increase the production of ethanol, and if the trends continue, the economy will simply grow, and the carbon footprint will continue to be lessened. So, thank you. That's all I've got for today, and here's my sources.